Hey Code Crew, how's it going? It's Chris here. And this is my new recording space, but don't mind what you see in the background because it's a work in progress and things are going to change in the next few weeks. As for today's topic, one of the most requested things I get asked about how to do is how to create a login page for your app. In other words, how to implement authentication for your app. Now in today's video, I'm going to show you just how easy you can do that using the authentication features of the Firebase platform. Sound good? All right, let's get to it. So I want to first show you guys what this authentication flow looks like with the Firebase Auth UI incorporated. So here I have this little sketch diagram I created for a module in my course, but it's still going to apply for this demo right here. Now first we're going to have this view controller here, which is going to have a couple of buttons and maybe a title screen or something like that. Each button will be a different sign-in method. However, for this demo, we're only covering basic email and password authentication, and so there'll just be one button. When they tap on that button, however, it's going to launch this Firebase Auth UI view controller, and this view controller actually contains a bunch of different screens to capture the user's email and password, and if it's a new account, to capture their name as well. And it takes care of all of that logic for you. You don't have to build any of these screens. All you have to worry about is receiving the result of the submission after the user enters in their email and password and submits it to the Firebase Authentication store, where all of these user credentials are stored. You just get the result, whether it was a successful login or successful account creation or unsuccessful. So back in the same view controller, you can detect that result, and then you can decide where to send the user. Either in this diagram here, because we had some additional information we wanted to capture from the user, if we detected it was a new account, we sent them to a profile view controller. And if we detected if it was a login, then we would send them to the home screen instead. For this demo, we're just going to send them straight to the home screen. All right, so I just wanted to show you what this authentication flow looks like. Now we're going to jump into Xcode, so we're going to create our project. Now this part I might move a little bit fast because we've set up Firebase so many times in all of our Firebase demos. If it seems a little fast for you, I highly recommend that you watch the Firebase Crash Course video, which I'll link to right here, and it will also be in the description below. But for this part, I just want to get set up really quickly so I can actually get to showing you the authentication part of the tutorial. So I'm going to choose single view application under iOS, and I'm going to call this Auth Demo 3 because I've done this a few times. I might have this saved somewhere. I'm going to create this on my desktop, and we are actually going to jump into Firebase now. Take note that this bundle identifier mine is 𝗀𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 firebase.com and sign in or go to console in the upper right hand corner. And then we are going to create a new Firebase project. So add project. I'm going to call this auth demo. Let's just accept all this stuff. It's creating my project. Give it a few minutes to do so. All right, so let's hit continue. Now we're at our Firebase console and we want to get started with iOS. It's going to bring us into a wizard where we have to put in the bundle ID. I'm just going to paste it in there, register app. Now we're going to download this Google Service Info plist, which contains all of the configuration details that the Xcode project needs in order to find our database instance. So let's go ahead and go into Finder on my desktop. That's where I saved it. I'm going to drag it straight into the file navigator of my Xcode project. Make sure that Add to Targets is enabled for this project, and also copy items if needed. Click Finish. And it's going to make a copy of this Google Service Info file inside my project folder. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and close the Xcode project because the next step is to add the Firebase SDK using Cocoapods. So go ahead and launch Terminal. Navigate to your project directory. Desktop auth demo 3. I'm going to type in pod init to initialize my project for Cocoapods. I'm going to open up the pod file in my text editor, and we're going to add a couple of pods for Firebase. So I'm going to add Firebase core, and we're also going to add Firebase. Let me double check here. So this is the documentation. You can get to this screen actually from the wizard here. Just there's a link for go to docs, and it's a good idea to have this stuff handy as you're working with Firebase. You get to a screen like this. On the left hand side you have all of these different tabs. Click on Authentication and sign in with a pre-built UI. So it's telling us that we can add either the Firebase UI pod, or we can add individual ones. Since for this demo we're only working with email and password authentication, I'm just going to add the Firebase UI/auth pod. I'm going to save this file, close it, go back to terminal, and type in pod install. Now mine's going pretty fast. Yours might go a little slower, so if it looks like it's not doing anything, just give it a little bit of time. Go grab a coffee or something. Okay, now we can go back to our project folder, and I can open up 𝗀𝗁𝗃 workspace. The first thing I usually do is hit Command B just to build the project, make sure everything compiles so we know we're working, our starting point is solid. Alright, looks good. So the next step, and I pretty much have this by memory, but I'll show you through the wizard so you don't get confused. The next step is to, in the app delegate class, to import Firebase and also call Firebase app.configure before the return statement. Okay, so in the app delegate.swift class, we're going to import Firebase. Now, if you get an error here, like it's not recognizing that Firebase import statement, then make sure you build the project first like I did. Here you're going to call Firebase app configure. And now I'm going to launch this project. It might take a little while because my simulator is just starting up. But essentially, what is going to happen is our project is going to try to communicate with the Firebase servers. And this next step is going to try to detect that just to verify that your installation was good. And if you've done this enough times, you're pretty confident with what you're doing, you can go ahead and skip this step. Otherwise, you just have to wait for a few, I'd say like about a minute. Usually once in your Xcode project you see this sort of output here in the console window. At that point, it's going to take like maybe a minute, half a minute to a minute for this to detect. Alright, so it looks good. Now we're going to click Continue to Console. Now I want you to go into the Authentication tab here. Go into the Sign In Method tab, and you can see all of the different ways that you can allow users to sign in. You're going to have to do something special for each of these, but it's there if you want it. We're going to work on the email and password integration here. So click this little edit button and enable this. Click Save. You're going to see that the status for email and password is enabled now. Now go back to the Users tab, and you'll see that this is empty, but this is where you're going to see all of the users that have signed up into your app through the, this is basically the authentication store, to put it simply. You're going to see all of your users here and all of their user IDs. And notice here that there is a user UID column. These are unique IDs for all of the users that create accounts through your app. Now this UID column is really important because you want to, if you're allowing users to create data on the database side of things, then that UID is what you're going to use to tie that data to users in your authentication user store. All right, so let's now go into Xcode, and we can now actually implement the authentication flow. So let's stop the project, let's go into the storyboard, and we're going to add a couple of elements here just so we have something to work with. And I add a label here. I'm going to add a button. I'm going to go pretty fast because it doesn't matter what this stuff is. It's just placeholder stuff. Let's call this Firebase Auth demo. I'm going to grab both of these, put them into a stack view, and then I'm going to center it, add some spacing in between these elements, and then center it on the view here. And now what we're going to want to do is open up this assistant editor. On the right hand side I see 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 I would rather see this. So you can slide out the tray. What I want to do is add a handler for the button tap so that when the user taps the login button there, I can respond to it with code. So I hold down Control, click and drag here, let go. I'm going to choose action as the connection type and type login tap. That's the name of my IB action method. Now I can write code in here to respond to that button tap. Now let's go back to the storyboard. We're not done here yet. All right, let's add another view controller because we want to be able to send the user somewhere after they log in or create an account, right? Here I'm going to just add a label quickly just so that we can see that it's a different screen. I'm just going to call it welcome and I'm going to center it horizontally and vertically. Now the last step is I'm going to add a programmatic segue, basically a way to transition from that screen to our second screen. And I'm going to programmatically call the segue to trigger this transition when the user has successfully created an account or signed in. So from here, I'm going to hold down Control, click and drag there, manual segue show. It's going to create this little segue here. I'm going to highlight it and give it an ID. Now, this is important because we need to have an ID to identify and call it from the code. I just call it go home, something simple like that. Now I'm going to go into the view controller. Now we can actually start writing the code for the Firebase UI stuff. Now in the import up here, the first thing you want to do is import Firebase Auth UI because we're going to be using that pre-built UI. And in the login tab, we're first going to get the default Auth UI object, set ourselves as a delegate, get a reference to the Auth UI view controller. This is this stuff right here, you know, the actual email password UI. All right, and then we are going to lastly show it. All right, so let's start with this first part here. This is a little bit cryptic. The class name is FUI Auth, and to get the default Auth UI object, we call this type method called default Auth UI. Now it returns, if you notice, an optional type, so we're going to have to check that it's not nil. So let's assign it to Auth UI. And then we're going to use a guard statement, guard Auth UI not equal to nil, else we're going to say, you know, log the error, and we're going to return. And just cancel out because we can't do anything if we don't have that default Auth UI object. Now we want to set ourselves as the delegate for that Auth UI object because if you remember from this authentication flow, in this Firebase UI, the user is going to enter in their username and password and submit this stuff over to the Firebase platform. And then whatever result we get back, we want to hear back from it, right? So this login view controller, and in our case, viewcontroller.swift, has to sign up to get notified essentially. So that's what we're doing here, setting ourselves as the delegate for the Auth UI. And the Auth UI object is going to notify the delegate when it gets a result. All right, so now let's get a reference to the Auth UI view controller. So let Auth view controller equal Auth UI. I'm going to force unwrap this Auth view controller. The reason why I can force unwrap this is because we have already checked that it's not nil up here, so I know it's not nil. Now we can present this Auth view controller. Animated is true, completion is nil. This is an error right now because we haven't said that view controller conforms to that protocol. So that's the next step here. But let's double check what that protocol name is. FUI auth delegate, right? All right, at the bottom of the file, we're going to create an extension for this view controller, and we're going to implement the protocol here, just so it's a little cleaner. It's not as messy. FUI auth delegate. And there's one delegate method in particular that's very important to implement, and that's did sign in with. You can see that it's got an error parameter. It's also got an auth data result parameter. First thing you want to check if there was an error is checking against error. You want this error parameter to be nil because that means there was no error. So you want to guard error not equal to nil. Guard. No, you want to guard the error is nil. Otherwise, if it's not nil, then log the error and return. That's like a double negative statement, so it's a little confusing because if the error is nil, then that means there's no error, right? So you want to guard that it is nil. Otherwise, yeah, it's a little confusing. But an easier way to write it, if that's hard to understand, is just if error is not equal to nil, right, then log error and return. Like these two statements are equal. It's just that this one, is like a double negative, so it's a little harder to understand. It's up to you. Okay, so at this point, if there's no error, then I want to show you how you can actually get the user that signed in or was created and access their UID, because potentially you may need to check, if they've got a profile set up or whatever. But having that UID allows you to check on the database side for anything you need to check for to decide where to send the user next. Whether you're going to send them to a home screen or whether you're going to send them to like a setup wizard or something to set up their profile. So if you want to get their UID, you can get it from the auth data result. It's got a user property, and this is where the Firebase user would be stored, and then that user object has a UID property. So that's how you can get that. I'm just going to comment this out because we don't need it in this demo. What we do want to do, however, is send the user to that welcome screen after they've successfully signed in or created an account. So this step would be basically perform segue with identifier go home, and the sender would be self. Now let's try this out, shall we? Let's press Command R and run it. And let's take a look. All right, so we've got our login screen here. We're going to click the login button and we're going to get the Firebase Auth UI. There we go. This stuff we didn't even build, right? This stuff we get for free from Firebase. So go ahead, enter in an email. I'm going to call it test@test.com. Click next. It's going to go check the user store to see if this is a new account or if it's an existing account. You can see here it detected there was no account under that email, so it says create account. I'm going to put in a name and a password, test. Now, I don't use this password anywhere, so don't try to hack me. Okay, so now we've created an account and we've come into the home screen. Isn't that cool? Let's stop the project. Let's run it again. Let's take a look at logging in this time instead of creating an account. So click login. I'm going to enter in the same email address. Click next, and you can see that this time Firebase detected that it is a sign-in and not a new account. So it doesn't ask me for creating an account. Sign in. Boom, there we go. So there's one more thing I want to show you, and that is the user in the user store that we created. So I'm going to press this reload button, and you can see here is the account I created, and here is the user UID. Right? So this is the UID that you're going to use to tie to data that I would create in the database if I were to like post a comment or upload a photo or something like that, and you want to associate those pieces of data with the user that generated them. Right? You would log it based on the UID. So that was a quick tutorial on how to implement email and password authentication with Firebase. Pretty easy to set up, right? In the future, we might go through different ways of signing in, such as using your Facebook account or your Twitter account. So if you want to see those and you like this video, please make sure to subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button below. Also, if you want to see more tutorials like this one, make sure you visit 𝗀𝗵𝗏𝗀𝗀.com and sign up for the newsletter where I share these tutorials with the newsletter before they're actually published anywhere. Now I want to turn it over to you. In the app idea that you have, do you have any sort of user login or account creation? If so, what sorts of sign-in methods are you going to implement or you want to implement? Let me know by leaving a quick comment below. Alright, so thanks for watching and I'll see you guys next time. Hey, did you join my free Facebook community yet? That's where I hang out along with a ton of other people learning iOS just like yourself. I also post early access to all of my videos inside that group before I put them on YouTube. You can also get help with any questions you're having. Visit the link below, click on the join group button, and I'll approve your request right away. Alright, so I'll see you in there. Talk soon.